inevitably we'll begin with an injury update. Is there anything new, anything to report? I know Joe Pritchard was perhaps touch and go with the hand situation. Have you got any more news on that?
Joe will be fit. So, one or two just little niggles, but, apart from the long-term ones, we're slowly getting the others back.
Yeah, you managed to get some game time into a few in the trophy game the other night. I don't have any wood to touch, but at the risk of jinxing it, do you feel a little bit like you're getting some of those shorter term ones a bit closer?
Yeah, one or two of the lads had a run out in the 23s yesterday as well, so they had a friendly, so yeah, just trying to get them up to speed and, get more available for selection.
Is that management of game time and fitness a big thing? When you've got under 23s players coming back from injury, how important is it that you manage that workload? And is that something that you liaise with the medical department on?
Yeah, you'd have to. I think back to the days when I played, and obviously it's different and I wasn't professional, but I can imagine that it would have been the same. As soon as you could run, you could play, basically, and now they have to have a week's training, they have to have a week twisting and turning. So you're generally fit and then you play 2 weeks later, whereas I'd say a lot of players of my age played when they weren't 100% fit, even coming back after an injury.
Do you think that's going to help this generation of players in the long term? I know a lot of retired players have got problems in later life.
I actually do. And I'm not advocating how we behaved. You probably didn't have someone to take it out of your hands. And managers wanted you to play if you were going to be in their starting 11 and players were keen to play, whereas now you've got the opportunity to push players and then lose them again, so there's no point employing medical staff if you don't heed their advice.
Has that increased even in your time in management, that kind of duty of care and looking after the player before the team maybe?
Yeah, it has. Sometimes you can go over the top, and we've got to be mindful of that you don't unnecessarily hold people back.
The psychology of being injured, how important is that these days? I know we talked about Joe Pritchard and the problems that he's had.
I think our players are lucky in the fact that it's never influenced me in how I relate with them. So I don't blame them for getting injured. I don't get on the case. I mean, you hear the stories about Bill Shankly wouldn't speak to the players if they were injured. No, I don't subscribe to that. You don't get injured for nothing. You don't get injured deliberately. You have some players who are more injury prone than others, and some who feel niggles more than others. But I've never ever, even in all my time as management, I've never looked down on someone for being injured, or I've never over-criticised them. And I know myself that when I was out for the best part of 8 months when I played for Morecambe with a broken leg, I know how frustrating it is. I know how hard you work to get back. So now it's one of them things. I think probably our players are luckiest that I don't get on them psychologically. I don't push them.
Do you think that's part of the reason why you have this good bond in your players, and everyone always talks about the atmosphere, because it feels from the outside looking in like everyone's still involved?
Yeah, it is, and I think people see how much we care and how much we care about the players. And you get to a stage when you've been managing for so long that you'd see players like they're your own family, and you want what's best for them. You want their welfare to be right, and you want everything that can be right or go in their favour. You want them to get it, and it's a bit like parents always want the best, or they want the children to have better opportunities than that they had. And you couldn't have done that any more than me with the players.
I heard Tony Mowbray talking about players almost being proxies for his kids in this stage of his management career. Does that mean there are more emotional ups and downs? Does that mean that you
Well,
live their lives as well?
Yeah, and you do get emotionally involved with them as well. But that's part and parcel of the journey, and that's probably why we love it so much.
League One then, it shows no sign of getting any clearer. I think you're something like 4 points from the relegation places, 5 points from the playoff places. You could be 10th if you win this weekend. When do you think we're going to know where teams are going to be operating? Is it becoming clearer to you?
April? I don't know. It's a tough league. And anyone's capable of beating anybody on any day. And you've just got to try and have as many days as you can. And you've got to hope that there's a lot of luck involved in football. I've been saying this for feels like all my life. And at every level of football now, there is a big element of luck, and there's a big degree of just getting a decision going for you there or there. And that just comes down to just a pot luck, and you've got to get yourself into a situation where you're not relying on luck, that you're playing in the opposition's half more than that they're playing in your half. So any luck that does bounce doesn't overly adversely affect you.
Do you, as a team, almost sum up the runs that you can go on in this league and the impact it can make? You won 3 on the spin, you were in the top 10, you've lost a couple, and now you're in the bottom half of the table. Yeah,
I think there's a few teams who've been like us, to be honest. And you've just got to keep taking every game in its isolation, because if you get your heads up on runs, you lose focus on what you're trying to do immediately in front of you. So, you know, obviously we've got a big game Saturday, and it'll be a big game for them as well. So, if you focus on what's ahead of you and you try and get your own house in order, then your job becomes a little bit easier, and the player's job becomes a little bit easier as well.
You've got a decent record against Bolton here. You've beaten them in the last couple of seasons. Does that have any bearing going into this in terms of the atmosphere and the crowd and stuff?
Might be the atmosphere, but no, it have no bearing on the result or how the game pans out. 2 teams who are desperate to get back on track, scoring goals in the league. I don't think either of us have scored in the last 2 games. So, should be a 0-0 or a 5-all. But, you know, we know that the wealth of talent they've got in the squad. And it'd be difficult for anybody, I think, to pick their starting 11 on Saturday. So, you know, we know that we're up for a tough challenge, and they're the games that we generally improve in, and we generally rise to the occasion.
Especially given,
as Climby Fisher once said.
Especially given you mentioned the results for both clubs recently in the league. Does that put an onus on the first goal? Can that be a big psychological boost?
I think the first goal is vital in most games these days. I know it's not always the case, but it has such a bearing on the way the game pans out. And we're desperate to get it.
We spoke a little bit about Tommy Lee getting back in the goals the other night, played perhaps in that more withdrawn role. Does having a recognised centre-forward option, whether it's Toure Cisse or Nathan Delfonso, does that give you a bit more flexibility, and does that keep the opposition guessing a little bit more when previously you've only really been able to play Tommy up there, maybe slightly out of position?
Yeah, I think so, and I think it makes their preparations a little bit harder. But we've got other players who can play in there as well, and we like to think that our attacking options can be quite fluid, so they can move within the game. And I think the better teams are able to do that and change position out well. And
we talk about scoring the first goal. You're making chances early in games. You're having a good spell early in games. It's the $1 million question for a former striker, I suppose. How do you turn that into goals? And do you have time to work on that on the training pitch?
It's difficult to replicate. I think we try and put players in situations in training that they could encounter in games. But as regards to how do you get that ball over the line, you just got to keep going. You know, you got to keep buying more tickets to the lottery. The more you buy, the better chance you got winning the raffle. But I know myself as a striker, when the ball wasn't going in, you kept on going in there, and eventually you look at it.